Hi everyone, welcome back to my next review. I will be reviewing First Blood Rambo, Rambo First Blood. It stars Sylvester Stallone as John Rambo, a troubled Vietnam vet, and it stars Brian Dennehy as Sheriff Teasel, and Colonel Trotman is played by Richard Crenna. It's about the Vietnam War. It took place, the film premiered in 1982. And it's about Stallone playing John Rambo looking for a friend in the Pacific Northwest in Washington State. The film was actually shot in British Columbia, actually, and he was looking for a friend that he wanted to catch up with, one of his Vietnam buddies, but he was someone that went up to, I think, a relative and asked where his friend. The lady said he passed away due to Agent Orange. And John Rambo was just wandering through town, and Sheriff Teasel picked him up and asked what's happening. And Sheriff Teasel, who was a sheriff, didn't really like drifters, as they called them then. And John Rambo said nothing, just wanted to eat. And then the sheriff said, okay, get in the car, he'll take him somewhere. And then he ended up taking John Rambo to the police station to be interrogated because Sheriff Teasel didn't really like drifters, rather. And this is an era when Vietnam vets were maligned. A lot of them were booed when they came back from the war. And this movie just kind of plays on those perceptions that took place at that time. He was someone that wanted respect but couldn't get it. And as a result, the police were bullying him, and Rambo just snapped and kind of became the Rambo that everybody thinks of today. Hiding through the jungle, fighting through the jungle, all these various things. And what Rambo wanted was respect. And that didn't really happen. And there's more to the movie, but it's a fascinating movie between wanting respect as a soldier and people not viewing soldiers with the same respect. And this also kind of plays on what was not then known as PTSD, which everybody talks about today. It kind of deals with that, and it's basically the whole town kind of police and everyone try and just catch John Rambo, and that's basically the whole premise of the movie. Spoiler alert. And fun fact, this was shot in actually British Columbia, Canada. Al Pacino, John Travolta, Michael Douglas were all considered for the role of Rambo, and Stallone was then offered the role because he wanted to walk away from his Rocky image. I did do a previous review of Nighthawks. That was a movie that was way ahead of its time, and he wanted to break free from the Rocky image, but he settled on Rambo. And a whole lot of actors like Pacino, Travolta, and Michael Douglas were all considered, and this was a time when people weren't typecasted for their roles, and as a result, that's why a whole lot of people were there. There are a lot of interesting facts to the movie. That there was a lot of criticism later on after the movie that Stallone was trying to play on the jingoistic nature of war. But Stallone actually would often say Rambo is basically like a political atheist. He wanted to fight for what's right as opposed to fighting for a political cause. And that is what John Rambo was all about. And Rambo was someone that was portrayed as someone who has grit and the ability to fight back no matter what. And that is something I think a lot of people can cheer upon in this movie. It's my favorite movie of all the Rambo bunch, I must say. And it's a movie where it kind of brings to light that violence is never the answer, but also at the same time, when society has maligned you, you have no choice but to fight back. And I feel like this movie kind of portrays that in a very sensitive but very empathetic way. There are a lot of interesting facts about Rambo. Rambo was someone that was actually portrayed off a book, actually. And it was written by David Morrell. And the ending was much, much more gruesome. Rambo was supposed to die, but that's how the novel ended. But in real life, it didn't end that way. Kirk Douglas, Michael Douglas's father, his son, was considered for the role of Rambo, was originally considered for the role of Colonel Trotman, which is later played by Richard Crenna. And Kirk Douglas left the production because he wanted the original storybook ending of Rambo. He didn't want anything altered, and therefore Richard Crenna was hired. Bob Redford was considered for Rambo. Dustin Hoffman was considered for Rambo. This was a story kind of based on Audie Murphy, who was the famous World War II veteran. But it was a lot more controversial, I must say, because the Vietnam War was controversial. The Vietnam War was a war that a lot of Americans felt wasn't a war of necessity. It was more of a war of convenience. And it is certainly insulting to all the other vets that served. But that's how the perception was, because it was one of the first wars that was televised. And I think when a war happens in your living room, you do have a different perception of things. And Stallone actually didn't want to be Rambo, actually. There were a lot of people were considered, and Stallone wanted to walk away from Rocky, wanted a different perception of himself other than the Rocky perception. And that's why he kind of agreed to play Rambo. And the fun fact is, even though Rambo is a special forces veteran, the US Army, he didn't actually kill anyone. And I felt that that is what made the movie kind of interesting, because he viciously attacks people, hurts people, but he doesn't kill anybody, which I kind of thought was a little interesting. You know, it kind of reminds me of when Bill Clinton ran for US president in 1992. There was the famous marijuana quote he had. He tried marijuana but didn't inhale. It kind of reminded me of that. You viciously hurt someone, but you don't kill someone. But other than that, it's definitely a fun movie. If you're like a Boy Scout type, or if you like camping, you can probably learn some tricks there, kind of like a MacGyver kind of vibe. But it's definitely a fun movie, and I encourage everyone to watch it. It's First Blood 1982, and I will see you guys at the next review.